The New York Mets lost game one of the London series, and it's all Starling Marte's fault. We'll talk about that on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You amazing Mets fans, you're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, the New York Mets got on the board first in the London series as Francisco Lindor had a leadoff double and eventually came around on a double by Starling Marte. But giving the Mets one run early is not really worth costing them, 4 runs later in the game, because Starling Marte made a non-error on a play. It's ruled a hit, but a ball that he should have caught that I think absolutely cost the Mets this game and really halted some momentum that had carried over from the series in DC. Baseball is a game about momentum, and little things can come back and really haunt you. And I think that's what happened in this game. Now, the Mets only score a couple of runs, and there was a ton of missed opportunities offensively that we can get to. Ranger Suarez pitched a great game for the Phillies. Their bullpen was nails. Yes, I might be boiling the game down to one play, and it probably is a little bit of an overreaction, but let's really talk about how that one play cost the Mets, because Sean Manaea looked good through the first 3 innings. Gave up a double to Bryce Harper, but that was it. Otherwise, he was spotless through 3, did not give up a run. 4th inning, he gives up a solo homer to Bryce Harper. Harper was amazing in this game, shows up on the big stage, no surprise there. Then he gives up a base hit after that, but then he gets a fly out. So Sean Manaea is sitting there with 2 outs in the 4th inning. And I will note, he had an opportunity to pitch himself out of the jam, and this one was on him. So Bryson Stott comes up. Sean Manaea starts him off 0-2. So he's up in the count. He loses him, walks him, and that brings up Edmundo Sosa. But he gets a softly hit fly ball to right field, one that ends up dropping in front of Starling Marte. And if you're just watching the game, you see the ball drop, you might say, oh, that was a good play by Marte. They were talking about on the broadcast how springy that ground could be, because they pretty much just in a couple weeks build over a baseball field on top of a soccer stadium, and there's some concrete under there. The ball could bounce. Marte doesn't want the ball to bounce over his head, so he lays back a little bit on it, bounces in front of him, he fields it. It keeps a run from scoring from first base on the base hit. But as soon as it happened, I immediately went to Baseball Savant, because you can check in on the game and you can see, all right, well, what is the expected batting average on that hit, right? That's one of the features over at Baseball Savant. They can show you. So expected batting average is, if that ball is hit that way 100 times, how many times is that going to be a hit? The expected batting average on that single by Edmundo Sosa was 140. The expected catch rate was 95%. That is a ball that has to get caught in that spot, because that's out 3. You catch that, the inning's over, it's still 1-1, and the Mets are right in the thick of a game against the Phillies. Instead, that ball bounces in front of Starling Marte. 1 run scores, the inning continues, then Sean Manaea serves up a 3-run homer to Whit Merrifield. All of a sudden, the Mets are in a 5-1 hole, and Manaea continued to struggle from there. So it's not just all on Marte. Sean Manaea did not pitch great in this game. He gives up 6 runs. But he could have been out of that inning with a 1-1 game, get a chance to reset himself, and you never know what he could have done following that inning. Maybe he does go out and he pitches a solid 5th. Maybe it's a 1-1 game and Adrian Hauser still comes out of the bullpen and gives the Mets a couple of solid innings. Maybe the Mets in a tighter game get a mistake by a Ranger Suarez or a Phillies reliever that's not as comfortable pitching with a huge lead. That one play really burned the New York Mets, and it really shows how this one player in Starling Marte, has his benefits. Of course, he got a couple hits in this game. He drove in the first run, but defense matters. And even if you had DJ Stewart out there, I'm not entirely sure he doesn't catch that ball, because it wasn't just a bad read. It felt like a lack of effort from Starling Marte on that play. a guy that can sometimes look pretty lackadaisical out there. And he just gets a horrible read off the bat, or he just was caught flat-footed, sort of jogs over to it. It's like, I can't go in and get that. Instead of trying to hustle and make a play. I'd rather see Starling Marte lay out and make a mistake there than be so cautious that you just let an out drop in front of you. Because if Starling Marte is on his horse and he makes a sliding catch, the Mets might win this game. But he doesn't. And it's little things like that that take you from being a 500 team that can maybe exceed expectations and be a little bit better than that and be a team that's in the race, or a team that loses games that they could win and ends up well below 500 and ultimately is a seller. This guy for the last year and a half has not been the same player that he was in 2022. And he wasn't a great defender that year either, but it's just these moments where you wonder if this guy is sort of on his way out in his big league career, maybe isn't quite giving it the same way that he used to, and it's hurting the Mets. And, Francisco Lindor talked about the team meeting. What went right for the Mets, right? What was it that they talked about in that meeting that helped them reel off what ended up being, what was it, 5 wins in the last 7 games prior to this one? And he said part of that meeting was looking yourself in the mirror and saying, am I doing everything I can to have the best year I can have? And having that accountability individually. Now, Starling Marte has swung the bat really well since that meeting. And overall in the year, it's been decent. But if he looked himself in the mirror and said, am I playing the best right field defense I possibly can? How could he come away saying, yes, I am? Because as much as he is in his mid-30s, Nick Castellanos has better defensive metrics than Starling Marte this year. And you cannot tell me that athletically at this stage of their respective careers, Nick Castellanos is a better athlete or outfielder than Starling Marte. But he's playing on a competitive team, and the effort is there. This felt like a lack of effort on Starling Marte's part. And again, there's other reasons the Mets lose this game, but that is the one that screams out to me. Now, from that point on, the Mets played a pretty decent game. Adrian Hauser, he was able to, after Sean Reed-Foley got the final out for Manaea in the 4th, Adrian Hauser pitched well in the 5th and the 6th. He ends up getting some help by Luis Torrens throwing out Bryce Harper in the 5th inning. 7th inning, he gets the first 2 outs. So he really carried the Mets through the middle portion of that game. Gave up a hit to Real Muto. Danny Young comes on to face Bryce Harper. Love what I saw there. Big strikeout for Young, although he did end up giving up a home run in the 8th inning to Nick Castellanos and a base hit to Bryson Stott. Adam Ottavino came on. But overall, I thought that at bat for Danny Young to get that strikeout, that's another thing. Just sort of put into your mind moving forward. Maybe Young does have some staying power in the Mets bullpen. As far as offensively, it was a bad game. I had the Mets at 1 for 9 with runners in scoring position, but I don't think that factors in the 9th inning. I think I pulled that stat prior to the 9th where the Mets did load the bases, but couldn't do anything else with it. 4th inning, they had an opportunity. Runners on 2nd and 3rd with 2 outs. Torrens struck out. 5th inning, the Mets did score a run. Lindor with a single, Pete Alonso with a double. So you had 2 runners in scoring position, no outs. You got to get both runs in. The Mets only got 1 in. Brandon Nimmo struck out there, and that was a pretty bad at-bat. JD Martinez gets a run in on a ground out. Really great base running by Lindor there to score. And that was pretty much it for the Mets. They had the 1 run early on the Marte double and then another run, sort of a hustle play by Lindor on a ground out. Lineup's got to be better, but again, the thing that really stood out to me from this game was that play by Starling Marte. You got to catch that ball, and those are the little things that ultimately will prove to be the difference throughout this season on if the Mets can actually get back into this race or they're sellers at the deadline. And if they are sellers at the deadline, could they actually trade Starling Marte? I want to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right on new customers getting $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Maybe you believe in the Mets tomorrow. You can put $5 on the Mets on a money line bet. You win that, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Or maybe you hedge your happiness. Bet $5 on the Phillies, you win that, you get your bonus bets. If not, the Mets won the game, so you're happy either way. You can also bet same-game parlays during these Mets games where you can look at penal odds or hitting a home run and the Mets winning. Both those things happen. You can really juice the odds for yourself. If you want to play over at FanDuel, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime something breaks on the Mets, so you can ask me questions anytime. We can communicate back and forth through text. It's also where we do our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and I send over the lineup graphic each day so you know who's going to be in the starting lineup for the Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Starling Marte is on a contract that pays him $19.5 million per season. It's not a team in baseball that's going to want to sign up for that, but we saw last year the New York Mets use money to eat down contracts and make players more attractive. Here's why Starling Marte will be attractive at the trade deadline. His expected batting average this year is .299. That is in the 94th percentile among all hitters. He's batting .280, .750 OPS. So he's having a good offensive season. And I went and I sorted over at FanGraphs the teams that are not getting great performance offensively from their outfielders. And I came up with two that really stood out. The Kansas City Royals and the Seattle Mariners, two American League teams that have not gotten a lot from their team offensively in the outfield that are squarely in the mix. And my view, Starling Marte is a guy that can come in and provide a jolt to them after the trade deadline, and a guy that they wouldn't have to offer up a huge prospect capital to get. Now, why this would work is the Mets would eat down the contract. The thing that's going to hold them back, though, is the defense. How do teams view Starling Marte defensively? Can they put him in the outfield? Is he a right fielder? Do they think he might hold up a little bit better in left, although his arm should be of value in right field? So that's the one thing, but he's not playing good defensively. Are teams going to view him as a DH? If they are, what kind of value does he really have? But you really want to understand how bad the defense is. Look at fielding run value and outs above average. When it comes to fielding run value, Starling Marte is at -7 runs. That is tied with Andrew Benintendi for the second worst mark in Major League Baseball. Outs above average, Starling Marte had -8 outs above average, and I promise that's going to go down after this game because that was a very catchable ball that he let drop in front of him. So -8 outs above average, where does that rank? It's third worst in Major League Baseball among all defenders, the absolute worst among outfielders. So the fact is, Starling Marte has been the worst defensive outfielder in all of baseball this year. That is brutal. And it sucks because offensively, he is a much better option right now than DJ Stewart or Tyrone Taylor or Jeff McNeil even. But the way Jose Iglesias is swinging the bat, like for game 2 of this series, I hope Iglesias stays at second base and Jeff McNeil gets his start in right field. That's what I would prefer to see. I don't know if they'll do it, but that's the way I would probably line it up because Jeff McNeil would be a much better starting right fielder for this team defensively than Starling Marte has been. And maybe that's the lineup after the deadline if they can, sell off here and get Marte's contract off the books. With those teams, if you were to eat down his contract this year and next year, if you were to turn that $19.5 million into $9 million, if you ate half of it, you could probably get not a great prospect, but something of value back. But really, it's about clearing him out. Because I look ahead at 2025, and I think Marte still clogging up an outfield spot is hurting the Mets. You have Brandon Nimmo locked up. That's the one guarantee. Drew Gilbert, hopefully we see him at the end of this month, finally return from that hamstring injury. He should factor into the Mets' outfield plans next year, as could Jet Williams or Luis Angel Acuna, although I imagine one of them will be playing second base, in which case Jeff McNeil ends up being an outfielder moving forward, where he'll either be in left or right. And I think that's probably what you're looking at. Going into next season, if you could clear Marte, you sort of have in your mind, all right, you got Nimmo and McNeil as starting outfielders, so to speak, and then you have Gilbert, Williams, even a Ryan Clifford, who's up in Double-A now, who could push for an outfield spot. Ronnie Mauricio hasn't played great in the outfield, but you never know. Maybe this offseason he puts that into his mind as a way to get on the field. He might add that to the toolkit. Brett Beatty could as well. Who knows if Mark Vientos is going to be a third baseman moving forward, a first baseman, we don't really know how it's all going to shake out. A lot of it depends on Pete Alonso. But to me, getting Marte off of this team for the rest of this season and all of next year, it just opens up possibilities for other guys to get into the lineup. We heard about Brett Beatty potentially playing some second base. If you clear Marte, that would allow Beatty to play second, McNeil to play in the outfield down the stretch this year. Whatever it ultimately is, I really think that should be our priority to this deadline, is clearing out guys that might hold you up next year. And I also look at Sean Manaea as another guy that sort of fits that billing because he has a $13.5 million player option for next year. And we've seen him so far this year. He has pitched well at times. But I look at the rotation next year, and let's just say you do want to make a free agent acquisition. So there's a free agent acquisition. There's Kodai Senga top that rotation. You have Christian Scott. You have Brandon Sproat. You have David Peterson, Tyler McGill. You have Jose Budo. You got a lot of options in that rotation mix. You don't necessarily need a Sean Manaea. So seeing Manaea potentially cleared out so that his player option doesn't kick in, these are the things I think about when you start to view the Mets as a team that has to, of course, play out this year, but really could gear up in 2025. That's the way I hope the Mets deadline plays out, is it really is a matter of setting themselves up as best as they possibly can to attack things next year. I still have my faith. Okay, one loss against the Phillies does not erase everything I said on yesterday's podcast or today's podcast this morning as I released it, or what I've been saying since this DC series, where I think this Mets team has it in them to make a little run and be an interesting team down the stretch. They have a super easy schedule in July, and if they can hold themselves close enough to the Rays, I think they can vault themselves into the conversation. But even if you are sitting in a wild card spot or a game and a half out at the deadline, making subtle moves like taking advantage of a team like the Royals that maybe are desperate for an outfielder and there's not a lot on the market, and they can, or they want Starling Marte to replace Hunter Renfroe. If you can make a trade there and clear up what could be an issue when you're trying to build out your 2025 roster and open up an opportunity for a Drew Gilbert maybe to play down the stretch this season, for a Luis Angel Acuna to play at second base with McNeil in the outfield, whatever it is, I think those are the moves the Mets got to focus on. I don't know if they have pieces outside of Pete Alonso and Luis Severino that will bring back the type of return they got for their farm system last year. But again, if you can create some roster flexibility, I think that will be a value for the New York Mets. But we'll see how it all plays out. Clearly, that Starling Marte fly ball really frustrated me. The fact that I'm now just spending all this time talking about how to get him off the New York Mets. But that's where I'm at today. I will come back on for a show tomorrow. Not sure if we'll do a stream again or if I'll just do my typical show that I release on Monday morning. But either way, I will have another show coming up here to recap the second game of this London series. You got a chance here. Taijuan Walker's pitching for Philly. That is a guy the Mets should be able to tee off on. Same token, Jose Quintana, you can look at the Phillies and say, oh, yeah, they should have no problems with him. So it could be a slugfest. The Mets will have a lot of different options that can come out of their bullpen. They have Tyler McGill, David Peterson, you'd imagine available if they absolutely needed them, because those guys are on plenty of rest. Otherwise, you keep your rotation in order, and you see if you maybe get a surprising start from Quintana. But it'll be fun to watch game 2 of this series in London. It is cool to see this game in a different environment and see how some of these guys deliver on the big stage. It's awesome to see Lindor starting the game off with a hit the way he did, but ends up being a disappointing game altogether. And the Mets will be back at it at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. So to make sure you don't miss out on that game, if you're not aware that it is early because of the time difference, sort of like those early morning London games in the NFL season. So make sure you don't miss it, and I'll be back soon. If you are listening on the audio side, to follow up with this, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. For those of you who tuned into the stream, I appreciate you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Trying to make a push to 9,000 subs, so I appreciate all of you who subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that covers everything in the world of sports. That is Locked On Sports Today, which streams 24/7 on YouTube.